Very honored and happy to be here. This is gonna be a short introduction. It's gonna be very elementary for some of you. So you may wish to check your email while I speak. For the rest of you, hope you learned something. First, a real quick bio. I'm a graduate of UH Hilo. I went to get my PhD in biogeography from LSU, who just won the College World Series. Yay. Did a stint as professor at UH and have been consulting for the last 30 years. I have a particular interest in biological conservation, walkable and bikeable communities, and the Strong Towns movement to improve our financial, social, and environmental sustainability of our towns. I serve on many boards and very occasionally manage to get something good to happen. Very occasionally. I want to preface this talk by saying that I personally do not consider the state's EIS law to be a hurdle, in the sense of an obstacle that stands in the way of your mission. Although no process is perfect, I think of it as a genuine blessing that has allowed us to preserve the water, the biota, and the historic and cultural sites of our precious state in a much better way than before. The EIS law is a hurdle, perhaps in the same way that a law degree is a hurdle in one's quest to become a lawyer. But I have no objection to continuing on this theme. So since the 1970s, Hawaii has had a law called the Hawaii Environmental Policy Act, or HEPA. Most people refer to it by the statute named Chapter 343 HRS. HEPA and Chapter 343 are interchangeable. So if you hear them used together, understand they're basically the same thing. It was modeled on the national federal law, NEPA. NEPA applies only to federal projects that affect federal land, or projects that require certain federal permits. Chapter 343 is quite a bit broader. It was passed by the legislature in the 1970s and is thus a statute. It lays out the basics and is a kind of an outline for the environmental impact statement process for the state. The administrative rules, which are found at HAR 11-200.1, fill in the blanks, and they govern exactly how the process works. For almost 50 years, the Environmental Council was in charge of developing the rules. The first major change in the last 23 years was finalized in 2019, after a 4-year effort that heavily involved the public, led by the Environmental Council and Scott Glenn, who was then OEQC director, but also involving the legislature, the public, the Sierra Club, LERF, many other parties were involved. In 2021, the legislature renamed the Environmental Council to the Environmental Advisory Council. And it wasn't just nomenclature, it's a real change. We are no longer in charge of many of the things we had before. We gave up quite a few powers during this move and turned that power over to the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development, or OPSD. And OEQC, by the way, became a part of OPSD, the Environmental Review Program. So many of you have heard the word OEQC for years and years and years. It doesn't exist anymore. It's now OPSD ERP. Let's hope they don't add any more letters to it because it's difficult. So even though we don't have the power to make the rules now, we are expected to play a very large role in future revisions. Now, like I said before, unlike NEPA, Chapter 343 has a very broad reach. It covers, and here I'm paraphrasing, use of state or county lands or funds, other than for feasibility studies or purchase of raw land. Use of any land classified as conservation district by the state law. Use within the shoreline setback area, and that's usually 40 feet from the certified shoreline. Use within a historic site or district as designated in the National or Hawaii Register of Historic Sites. I see Nancy McMahon here, she's familiar with that. Use within the Waikiki Special District. Any amendment to a county general plan that would designate land as other than agriculture, conservation, or preservation unless the county initiates it. If the county initiates it, it's exempt from Chapter 343. Reclassification of state conservation district lands to some other district. Construction or modification of helicopter facilities which may affect conservation land, the shoreline area, or historic properties. In reality, that's construction of any helicopter facilities. And finally, a sort of a five-part trigger, and that's a wastewater facility serving more than 50 homes, a waste-to-energy facility, a landfill, an oil refinery, or a non-renewable energy powered generating facility. All those things are subject to Chapter 343. Now, depending on your viewpoint, that either provides a lot of needed oversight for various types of projects, or it is a big spider web that catches all kinds of harmless projects and makes them cost a ton and take forever. There are three levels of review of these that are important to remember. You know, these projects that get into this spider web or this beneficial analysis program, however you want to look at it, can be for large, medium, or small projects. So we do an EIS for large projects that have significant impacts. Honolulu Rail, Saddle Road, or TMT on the Big Island. Those are EIS-worthy projects. EAs, or environmental assessments, are for smaller but still potentially impactful projects. Some of my EA projects have included a Monk Seal Rehabilitation Hospital, the West Hawaii Explorations Academy Charter School campus, many, many beach park rehabilitations, and various secondary arterial roads. That's the scale that we're talking about. In one recent issue of the Environmental Notice, we had the Upolu Well and Agricultural Water Distribution System on Hawaii Island. We had the Kahului DOT Base Yard.
While I know not everybody can attend,
Can we get a mute on that?
Conscious about making sure that we are giving over the course of several years.
That's great. The Kahului DOT Base Yard and the McKenna State Park improvements on Maui, the Waimea Kauai High School Gym Complex, and then a statewide EA for the coffee borer biocontrol. So again, that's the scale. Every issue of the Environmental Notice, you'll get 2 to 6 EAs, and every third or fourth or fifth, Tom could correct me if I'm wrong, you'll get an EIS, a draft or a final EIS. Most people are less familiar with the third role. That's exemptions. These pertain to everyday things that government does. Just consider your county's own public works agency. What do? They fix potholes, they replace guardrails, they improve traffic signals. Most exemptions don't require any work on the part of the agency. Exemptions for slightly larger activities require some consultation, some documentation, some publication. Exemptions are like the base of the pyramid for environmental analysis. EAs are like the middle of the pyramid, and the very top are EISs. Now, what are EAs and EISs like? You know, I like
Oh, sorry. Is Ron muted?
Ron
I think
is
he's
muted.
muted.
Ron is muted. Ron is muted.
excellent. Okay. I'll start again from where I saw you. What are EISs and EAs like? They're basically disclosure documents. You first research the resources out there: land, water, air, plants, animals, historic sites, cultural practices, economic activities, scenery, hazardous substances, traffic, noise. Then you figure out what the impacts of a project are on each of these resources. Then you develop the best feasible mitigation measures to prevent or make up for these impacts. One thing most people do not know, even a lot of people that are very close to this process, is that EIS scientists not only analyze the environment, but they also help guide design by providing early and continuing input to government officials, architects, and engineers on site conditions, sensitive resources, and community concerns. A super important component of EAs and EISs is public involvement. I can't stress that enough. There are opportunities to comment during open-ended or specified comment periods at various stages of the process. Public meetings need to be done for every EIS now as a result of the last rules. It's very important to compile a good list of stakeholders. How does the Chapter 343 preparation and approval process work? Projects can be divided into agency and applicant projects. If any state or county agency proposes it, it is an agency project. Highways, schools, hospitals, forest reserve conservation projects, these are all examples of agency projects. Applicant projects are the other type. They're proposed by private parties that require agency approval or use of government lands or funds not initiated by an agency. EISs and EAs are prepared for agency approval. That's who approves EAs and EISs, an agency. EISs are approved by the top agency, by the governor, regardless of whether they are agency or applicant. In agency documents, the agency either prepares it themselves, almost never happens, or selects a contractor. For applicant projects, the applicant generally selects a contractor. Another thing that most people don't seem to understand, and it's good to make this point, is that EAs and EISs are prepared not to approve a project. That's not what they're about. They're prepared to disclose impacts, develop mitigation measures in a transparent manner. The agency that approves an EA with a finding of no significant impact simply states that the project has no significant impacts. The agency that approves an EIS is not saying that it's a great project with no impacts. It doesn't give it a clean bill of health. That's not what it's about. It is certifying that the document adequately disclosed impacts and conform to regulations meant to ensure that. If someone sues on an EA or EIS, they are suing the agency to say that they made a bad decision. For an EA, this is usually the decision that the project has no significant impacts. For an EIS, it is the decision that the EIS did not adequately disclose and propose mitigation for all impacts. So with that, I think I want to cut it off and leave room for my other panelists, and I'd be happy to take questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Now we'll hear from Wayne Tanaka.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Ron, for such a clear and succinct description of our environmental review laws. I'm really happy to be here today with everyone. I just wanted to take a moment to kind of reflect on the work that we've, Ron and I and others have been doing around Chapter 343 and administrative rules, and kind of the basis for at least my approach to thinking about what might be most appropriate in terms of moving forward. And so really, I think what in general we are navigating is kind of space between two competing ideals when it comes to perspectives on land, right? And these islands we call home. And and not to say that any person's necessarily adopts or exclusively to one or the other, but I do think there's two ends of a spectrum of sorts in regards to ideas of land. And so on one end you have this American Western ideal where land is it's a commodity, it's a way, back in the day it was something to be conquered. Nowadays it's like a way to build wealth, a way to invest your money, and there's really a kind of imperative, and in some cases even a legal imperative, to kind of maximize your return on those investments, right? And so we'll see things like real estate investment trusts, pension funds. Now we have private equity firms, and that's really kind of their legal obligation is to, serve their shareholders and provide them with returns. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, which is, I think, is kind of like a Hawaiian view of land and of Aina as something, that's alive, something that's, provided for, not just ourselves, but, our kupuna. It's something that's going to provide for, our kids, our grandkids, and not just, in the food and water that we will need to physically, survive and thrive, especially, as we navigate this climate crisis, but in other ways as well. There's spiritual values. There's, Aina serves or can serve as a foundation of how we understand our connections to each other and to place. And so with that understanding also comes the idea of reciprocity, where, as in our temporary time here, on this side of the mortal realm, we have a responsibility to make sure that Aina can continue to do the things that it does. And and we're seeing how past decisions made 20, 30, 50 years ago, that maybe departed from this sense of reciprocity, are affecting us today. I mean, some of the most challenging issues that we have now. We have a huge cesspool problem. The places where I used to fish growing up, now they're finding PCBs in the fish I used to eat. Houses falling in the ocean. Communities that have been displaced, placed in situations of generational trauma that have resulted from land use decisions, and so really what land use regulations and planning processes like Chapter 343 do is help us kind of find that balance between these two ideals, so that we're not so we're and kind of accommodate the interests and needs of everyone, including future generations. And it's hard to see, I think both sides would for different reasons wouldn't agree that it's a perfect process, but at the same time it's really hard to see the successes and the benefits of this process, just because when it works, those you just kind of take those things for granted. So like one example that I think about a lot is Hanamo Bay in Mauna Loa, right? If you go there, there's a road that goes down to the bay, and if you notice, it's not asphalt; it's like this concrete road. And so basically, what happened was there was a plan to maintain that roadway and use asphalt. And because of the environmental review process, this coral biologist took a look at the plans and said, wait a minute, asphalt is actually highly toxic to corals. And so as a result, they were able to mitigate the potential impacts from using asphalt. We don't necessarily see how that has benefited us, but when you think about all of the, not just the ecological integrity of that bay, but also all of the the businesses that bring tourists in, all of the storefronts and restaurants in Coco Marina and Hawaii Kaiton Center, like that have all benefited from having this kind of jewel of the island that's been protected from some impacts that could have really taken away from that. So all that to say, when as we talk about, and as we all, I think, reflect on how we may move forward with clearing the hurdles of the EIS process, I think it's really important to keep in mind just how impactful like these details can be, and how important it is to take into consideration how what we do today could have ramifications, not just widespread ramifications in the near future, but also for generations down the line. I did want to mention the categorical exemptions. There's a lot of I think that's one of the ways that we strike this balance, right? So there's probably a number of things that you probably don't need as exhaustive of an inquiry or disclosure. Things like repairing fences or maintaining infrastructure that's already been installed or constructed. And then there's other things that people might want exemptions for that might be, have a more higher likelihood of having a long-lasting impact, right? So you're developing, new housing projects that, with all of the infrastructure, while it changes land, this could have a higher potential for having bigger and long-lasting, if not permanent changes. And so if we do, if we do want to move forward expanding exemption categories, then we might want to make sure that new ones that entail maybe more intensive potential uses of land have more guardrails, more a little more procedure in place so that folks can evaluate whether an exemption is appropriate or whether there might need to be a more closer look through an assessment or through an environmental impact statement. So yeah, I have a lot of other thoughts, but I just thought maybe I'd kind of share what I've been reflecting on, as we've been going through these discussions, with the legislature and then offline with the agencies and folks like Ron as we talk about 343. Yeah, and I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Representative Lowen, would you like to put the icing on that cake?
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, more here just if there's questions that come up that I can lend a perspective on. I'm not going to give a big presentation, but I'm Representative Nicole Lowen. I also went to, DERP at UH, and I dug this up. So when I was in graduate school, I worked on this. Get the camera to focus. No, it's not working. Anyway, this is the report on the 2010 report on Hawaii's environmental review system that I worked on with Scott Glenn. At the time we were both in grad school together, kind of naive graduate students with big ideas about what we should do with chapter 343. But so that's partly my background. And then I ended up after school running for office. So I've been at the state legislature since 2012. I represent District 7 on Hawaii Island, and I also chair the Committee on Energy and Environmental Protection for the last 5 years. Yeah, I mean, I think just to I think anyone who knows me knows I'm me as an environmentalist. And I think, the Hawaii Environmental Policy Act is kind of our cornerstone piece of environmental legislation, hugely important that we have it in place. And both HEPA and NEPA processes are really important to make sure that we're really thinking about projects before they're implemented. But just for fun to kind of take an alternative position and sort of, I'm sure there's people on this call that have one. I would say that there are times when it sort of feels like a NIMBY empowerment tool, and also times when there's challenging trade-offs that maybe it's not always the greatest tool to consider them. Like I think of the West Kauai Energy Project, where you have some water interests and other interests going up against the interests of moving forward with renewable energy and getting off of fossil fuel. And you have two really valid points of view and kind of laudable goals that are trying to be achieved, but maybe not the best way to consider the trade-offs there. So I think that while I agree, I don't think it's fair. I think that the environmental review process kind of tends to be a scapegoat for any project delays, when in fact there's a lot of reasons that projects get delayed. There are, on the other hand, sometimes ways that it doesn't always work perfectly. And I guess I won't go on for too long because I'm curious to get to people's questions and have further discussion about that. I just thought I'd throw that in there just to, spice things up a little. So thanks for having me, Marian, and thanks Ron and Wayne for your great comments.
Okay, if no one's put any questions in the chat box yet, we do have about 100 people here, so we can't all chime in at once, but let's try to. There we go. Dick, you got your hand up first. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I worked with the Environmental Center for reviewing EIS documents for about 20 years. And Nicole, you are not naive. You were extremely helpful when you worked at the Environmental Center. Two major concerns I have that really cover the whole area. One is the selection of the company that does the EIS documents is done by the developer. And very often when in reading the EIS documents, you find that the document very often defends the project in the way it's written. And I would love to see an ability to set up an independent group that would assign assign companies to review and to do the EIS documents, It's very self-serving the way it works now. And the second thing, I'll just mention these two things. The second one is that I very often find that when agencies have an EIS document done, and they are also the accepting entity for that document, that what happens is they, approve it. For the public then to go to court and try to overthrow it is expensive and difficult, and it becomes really, again, a self-serving mechanism that they just have to do the EIS, but then it becomes a rubber stamp when the agency itself approves its own EIS document. Welcome comments.
Well,
Ron,
if
go ahead, Ron.
yeah, I'll go ahead. I'll go ahead and take that big one from Jeff. Somebody's got a bit of a. There we go. That's over. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think, Dick, you're getting at the issue of conflict of interest, and you're bringing up several points that I've heard repeated many times before, and I share some of your concerns. I don't think it's as big of a problem as you represent there, but I do understand where you're coming from. I made the point earlier that agents that well, first of all, any company that just gets up and defends a project and does not correctly analyze it is acting unprofessionally. And that certainly is a conflict of interest. Everyone should analyze it objectively. But the yardstick for that is the public. I think that our citizen suit provisions of Chapter 343 are fantastic. And documents that I've been a part of have been challenged. And I agree, it's not the easiest process. Maybe that could be made a little easier, but it's certainly possible. I've also been a plaintiff on a number of EAs and EISs, and assisted other plaintiffs in this. And I think that process works really well. I got sidetracked from my own self here. I think it's really important for us to be involved in the project from the beginning to help guide the design. There are models like you speak of, and it's not that they don't work. Sometimes they work pretty well. I'm not entirely opposed to it, but it happens in California and in some federal projects. And the problem is that they ask the project proponent and the project analyst not to speak to each other too much. They have to speak through an intermediary. And then you don't really change the design. You just analyze the design. And without changing the design from the very beginning, you're missing out on a lot of opportunities to make it more environmental. Wayne brought one up with the asphalt at Hanauma Bay. There are actually sometimes hundreds or even thousands of design changes that are made by folks this way. So I do share your concern about conflict of interest, and maybe that's something that we should look at a solution for in the future. And I thank you for that comment.
Thank you, Ron. Does anyone else have any questions or concerns they'd like to bring before our forum? Please use your raised hand, and I've got too many screens to see everybody at the same time, so please use your chat. Okay, I got somebody in chat. Let's say if an agency and a consultant have prepared an EA or EIS for a project, there has been an investment of time and resources, money. Okay, that's stating a fact. How would does it? I'm not sure that we can do anything with that one, but to say yes, that's true. It seems entirely appropriate for a challenger to have to spend its resources to challenge a decision. from the same person.
Well, I don't know if anybody's going to react to that, but I
Yeah.
you know, I
don't
certainly
know
see
that
the
you need
logic of
to.
that. Okay, I certainly see the logic of that. You know, you've got skin in the game. But from what Dick was talking about, we just need to make sure there's a level playing field so that the wealthy developers aren't, you know, don't have an overwhelming advantage over those that are coming in. I've seen our courts bend over backwards to help plaintiffs get involved. And that's one thing that makes our system work pretty well. It's not perfect, but it works pretty well.
Yeah, and just to add and to go back to the last point about, you know, like good faith, you know, that's in preparing these EAs and EISs, in a lot of ways, if you are going to, you know, as an agency or developer, or, you know, if you are going to invest that, you know, the time and resources to go, you know, to comply with the process, you know, good faith is really your insurance against, you know, challenges that would arise, you know, if you were to, you know, just tailor your, just become a cheerleader for a project regardless of impacts. You know, like Ron shared, it's not 343 doesn't say, oh, if there's an impact, you can't do your project. You know, you just have to disclose, and doing some good faith is really going to insulate you from challenges that people will be motivated to undertake if they see you acting, you know, in a bad way, and especially if it impacts something that, you know, they care about deeply. And really, you know, for better or worse, the amount of it's not easy to maintain, you know, especially, you know, for a grassroots community, for folks who may have intimate knowledge of, you know, environmental or other values of an area, to challenge an EIS or EA, even if, you know, there's, you know, some less than diligent work that's done on it, and you know, and that's why, you know, I think sometimes the narratives of NIMBYism, or people, you know, abusing this process, it doesn't always, and I think in most cases doesn't reflect, you know, the reality. You're not going to fundraise and sell lala and like take time off from work and you know, like to challenge something for no reason. Like it's usually motivated by, you know, a deep sense of care and concern. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I guess that's just my reaction to, yeah, and as Ron says, you know, like there's different interests, you know, on the part of, you know, different, you know, there's people have different interests, and some entities, some folks may have particularly narrow interests, but also, you know, significant resources to do things. And while it's, you know, in my opinion, it's in their interest to ensure that they comply with all the processes, you know, with due diligence and good faith. If they do depart from that, which has, you know, has happened, then we want to make sure that there is a even playing field, or, you know, meaningful opportunities for, you know, other folks who may think about things beyond just, you know, profit margins, but we're thinking about, you know, the quality of life of and the integrity of our environment that we want to continue enjoying. We want our kids to enjoy. We want to make sure those people have a fair shake, I guess, in the process.
Thank you, Wayne. Okay, we have. Please discuss the intent, please discuss the intent and actual use of the quote unquote program EIS tool. Do the speakers think that option adds value to the EIS process? That's from our participant, Jennifer.
I think maybe mean programmatic EIS. Is that? I don't know if Ron, if you've worked on any of those. I mean, I think the idea is to create some efficiency by looking broadly at a category of project or program over time, and there may be need for additional work, but by being able to look at things up front. I mean, I think, yes, that it adds value.
Yeah, I agree. I know that Scott came up with the term program EIS as opposed to programmatic, and I forget his rationale, but they're essentially the same thing. And we wanted to introduce them for the reasons that you mentioned. I think they're a much better way at getting at the cumulative impacts of a particular program, rather than piecemeal handling different things. We can also have an EIS at the beginning of a project, even if we're not sure of all the different iterations that are going to happen down the line. Have a higher level of review at the beginning, and then tier off into smaller ones.
Someone's offering clarification for Scott's, I think that Scott Glenn's discussion of program / programmatic EIS is using a filing cabinet / file folder analogy, but can't recall it exactly. I don't know if that helps, Scott, Ron.
Yeah. No, that was a good analogy.
Thank you, Claire, for submitting that. Well, if we don't have any other participants,
Oh,
go ahead, Dick.
I was waiting, hoping that somebody else would ask.
Okay.
Could somebody describe the new role for the Environmental Advisory Council? What they are responsible for, what initiatives they can take? Could they be a step if an EIS were approved, for example, that it could review the decision before it has to go to court? What roles can the advisory body do, and how are the members selected?
Yeah, being the only EAC member on this panel, I guess I have to take that one. If
Thank you, Ron.
if Onauna wants to step in, I think she'd provide a better answer, but she's not on this panel. Yeah, we recently re-envisioned our role, and as I said, we shrunk a lot of our responsibilities because not because we're not interested in those things that you mentioned necessarily, but we're an all-volunteer body, and we have no budget and really no staff. The ability of a group like that to accomplish things like reviewing all the EISs that come in is nil. And we decided that we could not act as a court and review EISs that had been rejected by an agency to an applicant. We took that power away from ourselves. We see our role as a little broader, a little more general, and assisting agencies and citizens in achieving a better implementation of the law. In terms of who can be on it, anybody can apply. It's a board or commission, so there's a website to apply for that. And this is a great recruitment tool today. I see a lot of people on this call. We have 4 screens. And we need more members. We're short a couple. And please, if you're interested, please submit your name. And then you're appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate.
I'll just add, since we were, past the legislation to make the changes, that, we worked with the Environmental Council, like taking away some of the duties that we took away. One was having to do this annual report every year. Another was changing the rulemaking ability to OPSD again because of capacity. But we worked with the council members at the time to make sure these were changes that were wanted. It wasn't like stripping them of powers that the council wanted to hold on to. I think it was also largely a capacity issue. But I think in addition to the role that the EAC plays in the Chapter 343 process, that we also envision them as kind of an environmental policy advisory group broadly. Hawaii doesn't have a Department of Environment, which is something I keep throwing bills in to try to change, not with much success. But our environmental functions are really fragmented throughout a lot of different departments, and it can at times be challenging to have clear leadership or policy direction on some of them.
Thank you, and thank you for your support in making those changes legislatively. So in closing here, we'll ask, is there any one change that you might like to see in 343? And we'll ask that of each of our panelists. We'll start with Ron.
Well, I believe we need a supplemental environmental assessment. I think that would speed up the process quite a bit. Right now, it's sort of a limbo, and it's controversial. When it came about the last time in the rules, there were people were equally split on both sides. I'd like to open up that discussion again and craft the law in such a way that it made made everybody happy. That's not going to happen, but solve some of the problems.
Thank you. Wayne, is there anything you'd like to change in 343?
Yes, I think there's a number of things, but maybe I'll stick with maybe two that come to mind. One is trying to look at notice, right, and ensuring there's more meaningful notice to folks. Unfortunately, not everyone reads the environmental notice or subscribes to it, and so you might have folks that do have a lot of insight and perspective and knowledge that consultants and homeowners don't have about their particular area, and who could help mitigate any unnecessary impacts, or at least make sure that they're considered, as well as folks who are just a quarter of our population doesn't speak English at home, right? So there's a number of folks might be you might have information or should be aware of things that are going on that might not have meaningful language access. So if there's ways that we can ensure more meaningful notice, and including proposals that have been put forward about to the extent a project is taking place at a discrete site, to have on-site notification of what's going on and how people can participate in review. And I think in the long run, while I think this fear of NIMBYism kind of makes folks want to move away from more transparency, I think in the long run, if you do have these early deeper conversations, then it actually reduces the potential for conflict at the last minute that could be very costly and cause of be negative for all sides. And then the other wish list I have, at least on the top of my wish list, the other thing is maybe a consideration, especially for the top of the pyramid, and even for EAs to the extent it might inform whether there are significant impacts, but to include in your hard look an assessment of impacts that could exacerbate existing disparities. We have places throughout the islands where there are particular communities who have been, for whatever reason, for political convenience or land ownership or whatnot, those communities have kind of borne the burden of a lot of projects and sites. I think they've been called disamenities in terms of hazardous waste storage or landfills or waste burning facilities and so forth. And so if there's a way to include in these assessments a disclosure, or at least be mindful about how we might be exacerbating already unfair situations, I think that could be very valuable in terms of moving forward in a more enlightened and equitable way, and a fairer way, which I think would benefit all of us, frankly, when we think about the importance of community and our social fabric in light of, especially in light of the climate crisis.
Thank you. Rep. Lowen, you have anything you'd like to add?
Sure, I'll add two things. One, kind of building on some of what Wayne said, it would be great to, I think there's tremendous opportunity to have an updated website and make it more 21st century compatible. The environmental notice is great, and I know it's posted online, but it's not super user friendly. So there's a lot of ways you could increase transparency just by having a much better system on that front. The second thing is I would like to see state agencies use the exemption list more as intended. I think that for state projects, there's a ton of inefficiency, and they tend to, get really risk averse or err on the side of caution and sometimes not use exemptions when they could. And this really can delay projects. And these are public funds and public infrastructure, public facilities, things like schools, et cetera, and delays on implementing state projects. So I would like to see more efficiency, I think, from the state side.
Thank you. I know Ron chairs the exemptions committee for our EAC, and he's worked really hard to get more agencies to be up to date on their exemptions and to concur with what you're saying, Rep. Yeah. Well, I think that we're rapidly reaching our time limit here. I want to thank everyone for their participation. If anyone has any ideas of other forums they'd like to see the INO committee of EAC put on, we're open to ideas. And Dawn's been very ably populating the chat box. She put the video in, the link for the video of our last forum. It was really, I learned a ton from the administrators of Fish and Wildlife about tools that are available to get deeper information on land and areas within our state that people might have just interesting questions about. So feel free to check that out. And seeing nothing further for the good of the environment, I want to thank my INO committee. I want to thank the staff that, although they're not technically assigned to us, they still do everything they can to get me out of trouble when I get myself in trouble. So thank you very much, particularly Tom, I know you're out there. We'll say aloha until we meet again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Aloha.
Aloha.
Thanks, aloha.
Yes, please do it again.